Don't forget, you can reach the latest episode of Potomac Watch anytime. Just ask your smart speaker, Play the Opinion Potomac Watch podcast. That is, Play the Opinion Potomac Watch podcast.
From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Welcome back. I'm Paul Gigot with Alicia Finley and Kim Strassel. And one of the developments in the wake of these court orders we were talking about, particularly the Judge Kaczmarek order that asks for a national injunction against the use of the abortifacient mifepristone, is that some prominent Democrats are saying, just ignore it, defy it. The FDA, just keep doing business as usual and defy the law, basically, defy judicial order. Ron Wyden, Senator from Oregon, and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez both make their cases. Let's listen.
My view is President Biden and the Food and Drug Administration must ignore a nationwide injunction from Judge Kaczmarek. Don't give in to the court washing. Protect the fundamental rights and well-being of all women in America. The Food and Drug Administration ought to go on just as it has for the last 23 years since it first approved mifepristone. The Food and Drug Administration needs to keep this medication on the market without interruption, regardless of what this ruling says. Doctors and pharmacies should go about their jobs like nothing has changed.
Some of these rulings, I think we've been preparing and anticipating for there being these egregious overreaches by members of the judiciary appointed by a right-wing Republican Party whose goal for a very long time was to just pack these courts with partisan judges, often underqualified or completely unqualified for their role. I believe that the Biden administration should ignore this ruling. I think that the courts have the legitimacy and they rely on the legitimacy of their rulings. And what they are currently doing is engaged in an unprecedented and dramatic erosion of the legitimacy of the courts.
Kim, I guess if you don't like an opinion, you're eroding the legitimacy of the court. Rather extraordinary statements. Ron Wyden has been around a long time. He's the chairman of the Senate Finance Committee, so he's not a mere backbencher like AOC, but he's basically saying court orders do not have to be honored. What do you make of this?
Yeah, and can I add to this, Paul, that HHS Secretary Javier Becerra actually himself was asked specifically, is it possible that the administration will simply ignore this ruling? And he said, everything is on the table. So now you have a representative of the Biden administration suggesting the same. This is very dangerous, Paul, for the rule of law. And we're seeing too much of it come out of Washington, whether it's the Department of Justice being involved in elections, whether it's impeachment, whether it's the transfer of power in January 6th, politicians who are trashing on standards and norms, which really does undermine confidence in the rule of law across the country. And I was really struck that Becerra also said that the rationale for why you could potentially ignore this is because what happened in this court ruling, this is not America. Well, actually, no, this is America. This is exactly the point, is we have a rule of law, we have a process. You and Alicia were just walking through what that process is. I would also add, depending on what the courts decide, remember that this Texas judge has not argued that this drug is unconstitutional or violates a statute. He argued that there were procedural flaws in the way it was approved. So there's still the opportunity for the FDA to just go through the approval process again and put it back out there. There are a lot of ways that we can reconcile this without Democrats saying, yeah, whenever you got a judge you don't like, you just don't have to pay attention to what they rule. That, again, is very dangerous. And it harkens back to the 1950s when you had Southern Democrats who were arguing for massive resistance after the Supreme Court ruled for desegregation in Brown v. the Board of Education. We don't want to go down that road, and it's very disheartening to hear these folks making that case.
Yeah, it is. And I should say it's disheartening when you see it from either political party. Certainly Republicans have talked about that in the past, but nothing quite at least in my memory, that I can recall this kind of defying so blatantly of a court order. We'll have to see. So far, the Biden administration has not followed Becerra, but even raising the possibility that it's on the table is really problematic. You mentioned the fact that the Food and Drug Administration could reapply here. Alicia, that is possible, is it not? They could try to run the Administrative Procedure Act gauntlet again.
Right. So they could just consider some of the evidence that the judge said that they ignored on the safety facts and basically go through the process again, saying that we don't believe this evidence is really pertinent and that we are nonetheless have decided that the safety and the benefits of the drug warrant its approval. And remember, again, it would actually take a couple of years for the FDA to even go through the process of withdrawing a drug from the market. So there really isn't an immediate threat to access to this pill. It's very rare that a court would actually order the withdrawal of a drug from the market. Usually the FDA goes through its own process, and when it decides that the risks exceed its benefits, it will actually order a drug maker to withdraw a drug. And again, that process usually takes 2 years. I mean, Democrats are just trying to scare voters, scare women, because they realize this issue plays very well politically for them.
Your point is contingent on this national injunction not standing, right? That this would be something that is overruled by the Fifth Circuit or by the Supreme Court. Because if it's a national injunction, then the drug would not be available.
Well, the national injunction would basically require the FDA to go back to the drawing board, right? Or to withdraw the drug. And again, the FDA has a process for withdrawing a drug.
I see. So it might even take a while for that to happen.
Exactly.
All right. One of the things that's interesting here from a legal point of view, Kim, is that these national injunctions issued by district court judges, of course, they're sweeping, right? And they're often issued at a stage before the merits of the case have actually been heard, because they're issued by a judge, and you're only supposed to issue national injunctions if you believe that the likelihood of prevailing on the merits by the plaintiff is a strong likelihood. But the national injunctions have been widely criticized because they tend to be one judge essentially making a national legal policy. Clarence Thomas at the Supreme Court has criticized the much more frequent use of national injunctions. Bill Barr, the former Attorney General under Donald Trump, criticized the use of national injunctions. So I think that argues for the likelihood that this one will be lifted or stayed.
Yeah, we were talking about standards and norms, and this is another consequence of the Trump years. If you go back and look at the numbers at the presidents prior to Donald Trump, both the numbers for George W. Bush and for Barack Obama, very few, for instance, of their executive orders were tackled by a judge and had a national injunction put on them. Those numbers skyrocketed under Donald Trump as liberal justices started throwing out national injunctions right and left. And unfortunately, once you start to lower a standard or norm, other people feel that it is okay to do that too. And now we have conservative justices who, in reaction to Biden policies or in reaction to lawsuits that are filed by certain groups, feel much more free to throw these things out. And you're right, Clarence Thomas, some people would argue the most conservative justice on the Supreme Court, have really railed against this, has even prodded the court and suggested at times that if this continues, the court might need to step in and try to tamp it down. I'm not quite sure how they do that, but he's been very concerned about it. And one of the reasons is, as you say, first of all, it's supposed to show imminent harm, but the high court really dislikes these as well, too, because you are shutting off legal debate. The whole point of the process we have with district judges then going to appeals courts is to give issues a wide hearing and let the best legal minds all fight over it. Sometimes you get split appeals decisions, but that's the moment that it's ripe to go up maybe to the Supreme Court to hear it. When you do a national injunction, you're essentially having one person in a robe overriding the will of an entire administration, policy, procedures, everything that's happened. And it's just it's very corrosive to the whole legal system.
The other irony here, you alluded to it before, Kim, but one of the arguments in Justice Samuel Alito's Dobbs opinion from last year, this is the one that overturned Roe v. Wade, was that the opinion would send abortion policy back to the states, but also to the political process where it would be debated, where it would be sorted out in the states. That, of course, has been happening with elections. to the benefit of Democrats in most of these elections so far, the ones where abortion has been very prominently debated. But that is the way the American system works. And now here you have litigants and plaintiffs trying to put the abortion issue back to be settled by the courts. It's including in this case with this abortion for medical abortions, which are about 50% of all abortions done by this medical process through the drugs. It is basically asking a judge to make national policy, Kim.
Yeah, and throwing this again back to the judiciary. And I think the reason you're seeing this happen, Paul, is as this debate has rolled on post Dobbs, we have seen a lot of action, or in some cases, inaction at the state level. The legislatures are tackling this, not always in a way I think that is smart, by the way, for Republicans, but they're moving ahead with this. And I think that what's motivated this is that there are some groups, especially on the religious right, that have come to realize that this country is not where it was 40 years ago when Roe was first decided. Abortion has become an issue where about 80% of the country is in the middle on it. They want a kind of common sense policy in each of their states, many of their states. And so I think what you're seeing here are fringe groups, sort of more on the left and the right, that don't necessarily like where they see that political debate going at the state level. And so are attempting again to use the courts to override the will of the people who are supposed to be making this decision. And I think it's just be really important for everybody to remember the history here and how much harm was caused to the nation in terms of this long, agonizing debate by having the courts intervene in this in the first place.
All right, Kim, you get the last word. We appreciate you all listening. Thanks, Kim. Thanks, Alicia. Please be sure to send cards, letters, catcalls to pwpodcast@wsj.com. We're back every day on Potomac Watch, and we hope to have you with us tomorrow. Thanks for listening.